So the ontological difference is emphasized as the essence of ontology. So fundamental ontology is grasping the ontological difference. The rest is relatively easy. This gets you out of dualism, and this also can throw you into wonder. Philosophy begins in wonder. It also throws you into quality. Quality in the sense of sensuousness that Feuerbach talks so much about. Quality in the sense of the sensory. This is the wet spot. Being, as Heidegger says in some lectures, and in being and time, it seems like the most obscure, abstract, and maybe the most general concept, but he hints that perhaps it is the most concrete concept. And I think if you grasp the ontological difference in this way, you will see the concreteness of being. So being is presence, is quality. It's what Feuerbach was trying to point at with the word that got translated as sensuousness, right? There's a kind of, it's called Platonism, but I actually think Plato's esoteric or unwritten doctrine is in this direction. So I think Plato is probably misunderstood, or at least understood in a way that doesn't do him justice. But there's, the dualist tendency, which you might call mathematical mysticism. You might call it the mysticism of disembodied meaning, the idea of a pure meaning. So this connects to the theological notion of the sign that Derrida discusses in Of Grammatology, and he's talking about Saussure. So Saussure, he thought of the signified as a passenger and the signifier as a vehicle. Now Saussure was already starting to break this down because he was a very sophisticated thinker. So you could say that Derrida followed that vector that Saussure provided. In Derrida's critique of Husserl in Speech and Phenomena, you see an attack on the idea of this mystical meaning stuff. And why is it mystical? Because this pure meaning stuff is sort of protected from history, protected from time, protected from sensory experience. And this is what can provide people with, eternal truth. You see a lot of discussion of consciousness that reifies consciousness. And in general, scientism takes the meaning of its mathematics for granted. While it tries to be very empirical in one sense, it doesn't even look into the conditions for the possibility of, the sacred math to signify what is meaning. Okay, so I'll get back to that, but consciousness as presence, that implies a demystification of objective reality, right? What it means is that reality is only from a point of view. So it is the transcendent interpersonal life world that is present. Consciousness is the presence of the life world itself, but this presence is from a point of view. So elsewhere I said that consciousness is time, and this is my attempt to stress that the presence I'm invoking here is anything but punctiform. It's a dynamic presence, which you might call presencing. So we could also call it time or temporality. This would be time in the primordial or primal sense, the fundamental or original sense. And then things like clock time and physics time, they would be derived from the time that we are. As empirical flesh and blood people, we are things in the world, but the consciousness associated with us is the very presence of that world from a point of view. So the ontological difference in this context means that consciousness is no thing. Consciousness is no stuff. Consciousness is nothing inside the cranium. Now, what is also implied here is what you might call an ontological perspectivism or an ontological phenomenalism. Now, for this to work, you really don't have truth as correspondence to an objective substrate. So even though we definitely share the world, we can share it cacophonously. In fact, we do share it discordantly or cacophonously. So the denial of objective reality is only the denial of reality from no point of view. It is not at all a denial of shared reality. In fact, my approach, which I take from Heidegger, is a denial of any kind of reality that is completely internal. So I talk about the empty subject. Even daydreams, even my daydream is a thing in the world, though it is less accessible to others. But still, it is in the inferential nexus, it is in the space of reasons. So there's no sacred interior. The subject is not a container of pure meanings and qualia. We don't need qualia anymore. We are the site of the manifestation, or the presence of objects in their genuine quality. So what this takes from logical positivism and what connects Heidegger, surprisingly, perhaps, to logical positivism was his focus on perception as a situated perception. So for Heidegger, truth is fundamentally in the perceptual manifestation of the object. But perception is personal or first personal. It's my perception or your perception. Now, we should also insist on the situatedness of belief, right? We don't need truth, or the word truth is fairly meaningless. So we have a radical embrace of deflationism here. For me to call a statement true is for me to just express my belief. There is, disowned belief, objective truth, that's just a confusion, a theological confusion. So the ontological difference is emphasized as the essence of ontology. So fundamental ontology is grasping the ontological difference. The rest is relatively easy. This gets you out of dualism, and this